it's good to remember that even though Winston cracks and breaks, he says later, somehow you will fail. Something will defeat you. Life will defeat you. I know you will fail. There is something in the universe, I don't know, some spirit, some principle that you will never overcome. Do you believe in God, Winston? No. Then what is it, this principle that will defeat us? I don't know. The spirit of man? And the evolution, the power that has created evolution. And as I commented to you, and it isn't in Orwell, but it's in the Ice Cathedral, that if you look at the different phyla, if you look with the amphibians, there's fish, then there's amphibians, then there's reptiles, then there's marsupials, then there's mammals. What jumps out at you? One thing. In each leap, someone was taking more care of the babies. And eventually, in human beings, this protectiveness, which allows a species to survive, evolves into human love. But that's just me, that's not Orwell. That's in Ice Cathedral. But I think it's pretty much what Orwell means. He can't have O'Brien make a speech at this point, but he does a different trick, which I'll show you, which no one seems to notice. It's called the appendix on Newspeak. But let's go to the end. After he's been completely broken, after he's been forced in room 101, his hatred of rats, they have this cage in front of him where they could pull it apart and the rats would come and eat the flesh off his face, and he can hear the squeaking, and he says, do it to Julia, do it to Julia. They were waiting for him to say that. The last thing, the only thing he hadn't betrayed, he said, was Julia, and then they make Julia betray him too. So there's no more self-respect left after that, and he's broken. He's released, and he's in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, which it's section 6, it's in my 236. The chestnut tree was almost empty. This is where they put you on display before they finally shoot you, so that everyone can see what happened to the rebel. There'll be a Roman numeral 6, and then the Chestnut Tree Cafe was almost empty. It's just after he said, do it to Julia, not me, Julia, I don't care what you do to her. All right. He's so terrified that he even says that. The Chestnut Tree Cafe was almost empty. He's sitting there drinking this horrible Victory gin, which you and I recognize. Have you ever had the Mao Tai, the Chinese gin made from, I think, sorghum? The cheapest variety of it. It has an oily, bitter taste. Well, wait a minute, you were a little girl in China. You wouldn't have been offered that. But it is cheap, it is violently potent, and they keep, since he's the specimen on display, they don't even charge him. He sits there. A ray of sunlight slanting through a window fell yellow on dusty tabletops. It was the lonely hour of 15. A tinny music trickled from the telescreens. Winston sat in his usual corner, gazing into an empty glass. Now and again he glanced up at the vast face which eyed him from the opposite wall. "Big Brother is watching you," the caption said. Unbidden, a waiter came and filled his glass up with Victory gin, shaking into it a few drops from another bottle with a quill through the cork. It was saccharin flavored with cloves, the specialty of the cafe. And he's listening to the telescreen. After a while, he is going to be taken in again, put on trial formally. He'll incriminate everybody, and then he'll be executed. There's the meeting between him and Julia. And she says, "At the time when it happens, you do mean it." He had meant it. He had not merely said it, he had wished it. He had wished that she and not he should be delivered over to the... This might be 293 in your book. You could find perhaps a quote, "Under the spreading chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me." Perhaps 293. Do you have it? Okay. I read last time the memory of the other kind of paradise that we live in now. The memory of when he was in the family with his mother. And they played chutes and ladders, snakes and ladders. And it seemed like paradise. Another kind of paradise. It isn't only intimacy that's paradise. It's living in the family. It's having a home. It's privacy. And Orwell gives him this moment of happiness before the final crushing blow falls. He pushed the picture out of his mind. For a whole afternoon they had been happy together as in his earlier childhood. He pushed the picture out of his mind, the paragraph starts. It was a false memory. Go to where it says, "A shrill trumpet call." It's the very last page or two. A shrill trumpet call had pierced the air. Find where it says "the end." The end of the book. Not the end. Yes, there you are. Before the principles of Newspeak. Let me see what your book says. Give me. Yes, but I want to see something. In this book, it doesn't say "the end." And I believe it's supposed to. And it's important. Somebody has blundered. Okay, a shrill trumpet call. A shrill trumpet call had pierced the air. It was the bulletin. Everybody's been waiting for this bulletin from the armies. There's always a war going on. Victory. It always meant victory when a trumpet call preceded the news. A sort of electric thrill ran through the cafe. Even the waiters had started and pricked up their ears. The trumpet call had let loose an enormous volume of noise. Already an excited voice was gabbling from the telescreen. But even as it started, it was almost drowned by a roar of cheering from outside. Remember, O'Brien said the only pleasure will be in this triumph over the enemy, in victory. So these are the pleasures they take. The news had run round the streets like magic. He could hear just enough of what was happening from the telescreen to realize that it all happened as he had foreseen. A vast seaborne armada secretly assembled, a sudden blow in the enemy's rear, the white arrow tearing across the tail of the black. Fragments of triumphant phrases pushed themselves through the din. Vast strategic maneuver, perfect coordination, utter rout, 500,000 prisoners, complete demoralization, control of the whole of Africa, bring the war within measurable distance of its end, victory, greatest victory in human history, victory, victory, victory. Under the table, Winston's feet made convulsive movements. He had not stirred from his seat, but in his mind he was running, swiftly running. He was with the crowds outside, cheering himself deaf. This is, the only pleasures that are left. He looked up again at the portrait of Big Brother, the colossus that bestrode the world, the rock against which the hordes of Asia dashed themselves in vain. He thought how 10 minutes ago, yes, only 10 minutes, there had still been equivocation in his heart as he wondered whether the news from the front would be of victory or defeat. Ah, it was more than a Eurasian army that had perished. Much had changed in him since the first day in the ministry of love, but the final, indispensable, healing change had never happened until this moment. The voice from the telescreen was still pouring forth its tale of prisoners and booty and slaughter, but the shouting outside had died down a little. The waiters were turning back to their work. One of them approached with the gin bottle. Winston, sitting in a blissful dream, paid no attention as his glass was filled up. He was not running or cheering any longer. He was back in the ministry of love, with everything forgiven, his soul white as snow. He was in the public dock, that's where you stand when you're on trial, confessing everything, implicating everybody. He was walking down the white-tiled corridor with the feeling of walking in sunlight and an armed guard at his back. The long-hoped-for bullet was entering his brain. He gazed up at the enormous face. 40 years it had taken him to learn what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache. Oh, cruel, needless misunderstanding. Oh, stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. 2 gin-scented tears trickled down the sides of his nose. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. And in my book it says the end. In yours it doesn't. And I think I'll have to check back to whether the original manuscript does or not. And it's important. And I'll show you why.